The prevailing strategic narrative fixates on kinetic threats, hypersonic missile volleys, and carrier group deployments. This is a deliberate misdirection. While the media broadcasts AI-reshaped warfare concepts, the actual architecture of power is being dismantled in silence. Reports confirm a U.S. missile defense base is dealing with critical disruptions to its dining facility, a foundational, non-kinetic failure. This is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a systemic solvency crisis. The primary vector of attack is not a missile launch. It is the calculated induction of paralysis. Analysts at CSIS have modeled the blueprint, severing the deep-sea fiber optic cables that carry 97% of global data and blinding the satellite networks that are the eyes of the modern state. This is not science fiction. It is the next phase of asymmetric economic warfare, designed to trigger a liquidity crisis in command and control. An adversary doesn't need to win a kinetic exchange if it can prevent you from participating. The objective is to create a blind Leviathan, a superpower with immense military force, but no sensory input, no targeting data, and no communication. It cannot see, it cannot hear. It is trapped within its own borders by a wall of silence. This state of induced blindness, coupled with internal pressures like domestic economic warfare, creates a mathematical certainty. A cornered leadership, deprived of conventional options and facing humiliation, views its nuclear arsenal not as a deterrent, but as its last remaining leverage. The silence is the true launch-on warning signal. The motive is not conquest, it is solvency. A nation-state, like any corporation, can become financially and politically insolvent. When its core liabilities, in this case, an unpopular war and a degrading domestic economy, exceed its assets, its leadership faces a legitimacy crisis. RUSI analysis confirms this vector in Russia. The war is a domestic liability, a drain on capital and political stability. To mask this internal bankruptcy, the state must generate a different kind of asset: fear. This is not a foreign phenomenon. Systemic fragility is a universal accelerant. Consider the report of critical disruptions at a missile defense base's dining facility. The kinetic spear tip is rendered useless by a non-kinetic logistical failure. This is a microcosm of the entire thesis. When the state itself must declare war on Wall Street landlords to solve a housing crisis, it signals a terminal breakdown in internal economic cohesion. The system is consuming itself. This internal weakness forces a pivot. A leadership cornered by a solvency crisis can't afford a protracted, conventional conflict it is demonstrably losing. The mathematical calculus shifts. Humiliation is a zero-sum outcome. Therefore, the only remaining leverage is asymmetric escalation. A disproportionate kinetic response is not an act of madness. It is the final, logical move for a player with no other cards, where the kinetic cost is lower than the political cost of defeat. The war, therefore, is an externalization of this solvency crisis. CSIS analysis aligns. As conventional options atrophy, the probability of a launch-on warning, posture against non-military, economic, or infrastructure targets increases exponentially. The objective is not to win the war on the battlefield, but to refinance political capital at home. It is a terrifyingly rational response to a bankrupt system where a single, shocking kinetic event is the only tool left to prevent total internal collapse. The core economic equation of modern warfare is broken. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, provides the data points. A $5 million main battle tank, a rolling fortress of industrial-era power, is now a systemic liability. It is being methodically neutralized by a $500 FPV drone. This is a 10,000 to 1 cost asymmetry. The math dictates this is not a sustainable model. It is a solvency crisis expressed through kinetic exchange. Analysts term this the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for executing a strategic strike has collapsed. Projecting lethal force no longer requires a nation-state's treasury and industrial base. It requires an internet connection and a credit card. This vector completely decouples lethality from state monopoly. When a state's most advanced platforms can be liquidated by commercially available technology, the established protocols of deterrence evaporate. The economic impossibility of winning a symmetric war of attrition creates a mathematical certainty for escalation. Leadership cannot accept systemic humiliation. Their only remaining leverage is to escalate to a domain where a $500 drone is irrelevant, triggering launch-on-warning postures for strategic, non-conventional assets. The kinetic cost becomes infinite. The regional instability you are shown is not a failure of local governance. It is a proxy laboratory, a gray zone where new vectors of systemic collapse are tested and calibrated. CSIS reports confirm that second-tier nations are being used as live-fire ranges for non-kinetic warfare protocols. The objective is to measure the precise input required, the exact level of supply chain disruption or financial pressure to trigger a predetermined political outcome. It is a blueprint for controlled demolition, staged far from the core. The evidence is in the open, but deliberately atomized. Consider source number 1, a critical dining facility disruption at a missile defense base. This is not a catering issue. It is a successful test of a logistics degradation vector against a high-value strategic asset. The vulnerability of a launch-on-warning system was quantified without firing a single shot. Concurrently, geopolitical maneuvers like the threats over Greenland, flagged by analysts in source number 4, are not random acts. They are alliance solvency tests designed to create strategic liabilities and measure the fracture points of Western security architecture in the Arctic, another critical gray zone. This is the mechanism. Data from these proxy laboratories, the kinetic cost of a riot, the political effect of a supply chain break, is fed into AI-driven strategic models, as referenced in source number 3. These systems are not just reshaping future war, they are engineering the present. They calculate the most efficient path to corner a competitive state by collapsing its internal systems. This is the new battlefield, a solvency crisis, not a territorial invasion. Domestic economic warfare, as hinted at in policy shifts like those in source number 2, becomes the primary attack surface. The math does not lie. When these perfected, non-kinetic vectors are turned inward against a major power, degrading its logistics and weaponizing its economy, the leadership faces a zero-sum choice. Accept systemic humiliation and collapse, or escalate. With all other forms of leverage neutralized, a disproportionate kinetic response becomes the only remaining strategic asset. The mathematical certainty is that a cornered state will trigger an asymmetric launch. That is not a risk, it is the protocol. The launch-on-warning doctrine is a Cold War protocol designed to ensure a retaliatory strike can be initiated upon detection of an inbound enemy launch before the assets are destroyed on the ground. According to analysts at CSIS, it is a zero-sum calculation against a decapitation strike. The protocol's primary liability is its reliance on sensor data. If that data feed is severed, the system defaults to a worst-case scenario. This is the fog of digital war. A cyber attack blinds the radar, and the commander is forced to execute the launch protocol based not on what they see, but on what they can no longer see. The absence of information becomes the trigger. This digital vulnerability is an accelerant for pre-existing systemic decay. Consider the report from Task and Purpose. A missile defense base is already dealing with critical disruptions at its dining facility. This is not a trivial matter. It is a data point. Proving logistical solvency is degrading at the most critical points of the kinetic chain. An adversary's calculus no longer requires defeating the missile shield directly. It only requires exploiting the mathematical certainty that the system is already under strain from within. The war is won by targeting the supply chain, not the silo. The vector for this asymmetric attack is now clear. As The Hill reports, artificial intelligence is reshaping the future of war. An AI-driven offensive does not need to fire a single shot. It can instead inject a crippling volume of false signals or create a total information blackout, forcing the defense protocol to activate under false pretenses. While domestic leadership is occupied with internal economic conflicts, such as the declared war on Wall Street landlords noted by AOL, the digital flanks are left exposed. The focus on internal liabilities creates the opening for an external, non-kinetic checkmate. The strategic reality is that the new battlefield is the decision-making process itself. The logic echoes dark moments of Cold War alliances, as noted by The Guardian, but the weapon is now information. By blinding the commander, the attacker outsources the kinetic action to the victim's own defense doctrine. The fear of being disarmed creates the mathematical certainty of a launch. This is the ultimate leverage, forcing a nation's hand by making humiliation the only alternative to escalation. The non-kinetic attack doesn't just invite a kinetic response, it automates it. A missile defense base cannot secure its own food supply. According to Task and Purpose, the disruption is critical. This is not a logistical error. It is a vector analysis. It proves the systemic fragility of assets once considered hardened. While domestic political capital is spent declaring war on Wall Street landlords, the true asymmetric threat metastasizes. The Hill confirms artificial intelligence is the accelerant, the protocol for executing a solvency crisis without a kinetic cost. The calibration shot is, therefore, a mathematical certainty. Within the next 12 months, anticipate a multi-hour, attribution-impossible blackout at a primary financial data clearinghouse, targeting U.S. equity or bond market operations. The event will not be attributed to a state actor. It will be officially designated a cascading software failure. This is the non-kinetic launch-on-warning signal, designed to test U.S. response protocols and demonstrate leverage before the true kinetic cost is calculated.